Welcome to Singapore with the spectacular Marina Bay Sands as my backdrop. And you know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than why do they call it a building when it's already built, that question would have to be, how can you capture the diversity of Singapore in 2023 with a mid-20th century folding medium format camera? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question.
This is the Voigtlander Perkeo. The word Perkeo means pygmy, and while probably neither of those terms are very politically correct, they were different times, and I don't think that the pygmy hippopotamus is going to sue my YouTube channel for being sizist. Still, it's small, it's cute, it folds and unfolds, and in that sense, it's a delight. This particular camera had been gathering dust for a while before being gifted to me by somebody who'd been following my photography. So thanks, Linda, I have had this now for about 6 years and I have used it well. Most recently, I found myself in Singapore for work and I had the option of either settling into another round of Tiger Beer with colleagues or taking the Perkeo with me for a brief walk from Bugis to Little India. I had 2 rolls of Ilford HP5 pushed to ISO 1600 and a fierce determination to find interesting subjects and pockets of light to illuminate them. One of the cool things about Singapore is the different styles and cultures you can find in such a small area. It was just a short train ride from Promenade to Bugis Junction, where the stark modernity of Marina Bay gave way to a much more human and slightly chaotic street culture.
I feel so suffocated. This relationship is toxic.
And I was reassured to realize that that particular moment was caught on my GoPro and wasn't simply some kind of weird internal narrative fugue triggered by navigating the MRT. Pretty soon, I found myself on Bugis Street. So what about the Voigtlander Perkeo 1? As the name suggests, this was the first version of the camera. It was superseded by the Perkeo 2 and the Perkeo E. There were over 100,000 copies of the Perkeo 1 made, and there were a few iterations. This particular one came with some tweaks to the original, such as the ability to close off the red frame advanced window and a clever automatic locking mechanism to prevent double exposure. So that's 2 rounds to Voigtlander against my human error, but unfortunately it's not a foolproof camera, it's fiddly. Let's take a closer look. Firstly, this is a manual medium format camera. No surprises there. It dates back to the early 1950s when 120 film was the dominant format. So larger roll film that can be a bit annoying to load in and out, but you end up with those gorgeous 6x6 medium format negatives. Capturing images on that film though can be a bit challenging. Most of the cool stuff sits on the lens. That's because it has a leaf shutter built into it rather than a cloth or metal mechanism at the focal plane. The good side of that is that you have everything available right there and the flash can synchronize at every shutter speed. The bad side is that you find yourself having to make micro adjustments with your fingernails for the shutter speed and aperture. The shutter speed ranges from 1/250th to 1/25th of a second, or not very fast to not very slow, although it does have a bulb mode that you can use if you want to put it on a tripod. The aperture range is from not too small, f16, to not very wide at f4.5. I wouldn't worry about the lack of wide aperture though. One of the quirks of medium format is that because of the physical image size, for a given focal length you end up with a commensurately narrower depth of field. That's not just true of film. The sensor on your full frame 35mm camera allows you to obtain that creamy bokeh in ways that your iPhone just can't because of the minuscule chip inside it. Trust me, it's all about physics. That or the phases of the moon working on the tides, which in turn makes a butterfly in China flap its wings. In any case, f1.8 would be impractical here. If it opened up wider than around f3.5, then the focal plane would be perilously thin. And it's made worse by the fact that you have no focusing aids here. You have to rely on your ability to judge distance in feet, since it's basically a relic of the imperial system. For a camera like this, f4.5 is probably about as wide as you can go, while still being able to make sure that your point of focus will be sharp, so don't worry about the lack of wide aperture. And I do say that because of course I was shooting at night, and I soon found out that the further away from Bugis I got, the deader and darker the streets became. Fortunately, I'm a brave boy, and armed with another roll of Ilford HP5, I tried to squeeze a final few frames out before heading home. As you can probably tell from those photos, while I made my way to the Little India MRT, the opportunities thinned out just as the people did. Shots like this are legitimately a waste of film, but I guess it's a good way to test your limits. Overall, I didn't come away with lots of portfolio shots. I mean, I could argue that this picture is an indictment of our wasteful society or a critique of our slavery to the 21st century complexities of the logistically fraught supply chain in a post-COVID world. But yeah, it's a photograph of some empty boxes. I did have an idea for this one that the predominant blackness could draw the eye through the image to the car, and that the use of negative space would provide a counterpoint to the light casting through the arches. Not sure it worked, but the blackness of the top could make for a good masthead, at least on the cover of my first novel. If anyone's keen to read that, please let me know. I mean, I haven't written it yet, but you know, what digital media academic doesn't have a hankering to write a detective noir novel opus? Still haven't finalized the title. Maybe Larceny in the Lion City, Singapore Slingshot, The Case of the Bugis Budgie Burglar. Anyway, the better shots generally had people in them. I did hang around in a couple of locations for people to walk by, and in some cases, that actually took a long time. And I'm not very patient. In my last video, I found people like this. Now, where the hell was she when I took this photo? Instead, I ended up with some random dude carrying a plastic shopping bag. If I'm to pick a few keepers, most of them came from the first roll. I do like this one because of the weird tension of the geometry and the posture of the people in it. I definitely feel like I captured some kind of moment, albeit a fairly baffling one. I like the lighting on this one, and while it's obviously just a casual smoke break, the connection between the people and the hearts in the window lets you make your own story here, I think. And I like the interaction going on here, but it probably wasn't the best composition. I don't think this one really lent itself to a square frame. So they're probably my favorites from the evening, but let's be real, none of these photos are going to get me into Magnum. It was possibly a combination of the weeknight evening and my desperation to cram some creativity into a busy work schedule that's to blame. And while shooting film at night with a nearly 70-year-old camera was always going to be a challenge, I can't really blame the technology. The fact is, this Voigtlander Perkeo is a gem. In decent light, it didn't let me down at all. It's sharp where it needs to be, but it gives a nice, characterful, low-contrast look that mitigates some of the issues of shooting ISO 1600. The fact that it's medium format means the grain isn't so noticeable, and of course, you do get that 3D pop when you shoot something fairly close, wide open. As I mentioned, it's traveled with me around the world from Vancouver to Dubai, Estonia, to Hangzhou, to Amsterdam. In fact, I dropped it on the ground when I was taking this picture, which is why there's a lovely big dent on the lens cover. Seriously, I don't deserve good things. It's small, but substantial, weighing in at 525 grams, and if you're patient enough to use an external meter and are comfortable with the square format, it takes some great shots. Even if you're like me and too lazy to use a tripod or meter for exposure, you can get good pictures from it. You just have to accept that not every photo is going to be a keeper. So, have you used one of these? If not, then it's definitely something worth seeking out. I've had a couple of these. In fact, I have an Agfa Isolette and an even older Voigtlander Besser that produces amazing 16:9 negatives. But this is probably the sweet spot in terms of size, quality, and yes, even ease of use. Perhaps not the greatest low light camera in the world, but a gem nonetheless, and now I've got a fresh roll of film in here. I think it's time to go out and take some photographs. Later.